The dust swirled across the parched Wyoming Territory street as Willow Zander's stagecoach arrived in Taylorsville, her chest tightening with each labored breath. The year was 1878, and the frontier town sprawled before her like an unwelcoming mirage after her long journey from Boston. The altitude and her tightly laced corset conspired against her lungs, making the simple act of breathing a struggle as she stepped down from the coach. The journey west had been Willow's desperate attempt to escape her past. At 22, she had already endured more heartache than most women twice her age. Her father's unexpected death had left the family destitute, and her mother had succumbed to consumption just months later. With nothing left for her in Boston, she had answered an advertisement seeking teachers for the newly established school in Taylorsville, Wyoming Territory. Willow stumbled as her boots touched the dusty ground, her vision clouding as the thin mountain air failed to fill her lungs. The stagecoach driver was already unloading her trunk, paying no mind to her distress. Her knees buckled, and she reached blindly for support. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. Through her dimming vision, Willow saw a weathered face beneath the brim of a dusty hat, concern evident in eyes the color of a summer sky. "Miss, are you all right?" The man's voice was deep, tinged with worry. Willow tried to respond, but her constricted chest allowed only a desperate whisper. "I can't breathe." The cowboy's expression softened with understanding. He leaned closer, his voice a gentle rumble against her ear. "Then borrow my air till you can." Before she could comprehend his words, his mouth covered hers in what wasn't quite a kiss, but rather a transfer of life itself. He breathed slowly into her mouth, once, twice, giving her the oxygen her body so desperately craved. The intimate act lasted only seconds, but it was enough to clear her vision and steady her racing heart. When he pulled away, Willow's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and something else she couldn't name. The cowboy steadied her with his hands on her shoulders. "The altitude gets to newcomers," he explained, his voice matter-of-fact despite what had just transpired between them. "You'll adjust in a few days." "Thank you," Willow managed, her voice stronger now. "I don't know what happened." "Preston Cole." He introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Town marshal." Of course, she thought. Her rescuer wasn't just any cowboy, but the law in Taylorsville. His badge glinted in the afternoon sun, previously hidden by the duster he wore despite the summer heat. "Willow Zander," she replied. "The new schoolteacher." Recognition dawned in Preston's eyes. "We've been expecting you, Miss Zander. The school board was starting to worry you might not make it before the term begins." Willow smoothed her travel-wrinkled skirt, trying to regain her composure. "My journey took longer than anticipated. There was trouble with the railroad near Cheyenne." Preston nodded knowingly. "Indian troubles or bandits?" "Neither. A broken axle delayed us for 2 days." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Less exciting, but equally troublesome." He gestured toward the main street. "Let me help with your trunk. Mrs. Holloway's boarding house is just down the way. She's expecting you." As they walked, Willow became increasingly aware of the curious glances from the townspeople. She wondered if they had witnessed her moment of weakness and Marshal Cole's unconventional assistance. "Don't mind them," Preston said, seeming to read her thoughts. "New faces are rare enough to cause a stir, especially one as pretty as yours." Willow felt her cheeks warm at the unexpected compliment. In Boston, she had never been considered a beauty with her auburn hair and freckled complexion. Her older sister had been the family beauty, before typhoid had claimed her during Willow's 16th year. "Marshal Cole, I must thank you again for your help, but also ask for your discretion. I wouldn't want the school board to think they've hired someone of delicate constitution." Preston stopped walking and turned to face her. "Miss Zander, out here, helping one another isn't just neighborly, it's survival. No one would think less of you for needing a moment's assistance." Willow wasn't entirely convinced, but she nodded her thanks as they arrived at a 2-story clapboard house with a neat picket fence. The sign reading Holloway Boarding House swung gently in the breeze. "Here we are," Preston said, setting down her trunk. "Mrs. Holloway runs the finest establishment in town. You'll be comfortable here." The door opened before Willow could respond, revealing a plump woman with silver-streaked hair and a warm smile. "You must be Miss Zander," the woman exclaimed. "And Marshal Cole bringing you personally, what an honor for our new teacher." Preston tipped his hat. Just doing my duty, Mrs. Holloway. Miss Zander had a touch of altitude sickness when she arrived. Mrs. Holloway clucked sympathetically. Poor dear. Come in, come in. I've got water boiling for tea, and your room is all prepared. Willow turned to thank the marshal once more, but he was already stepping back. Welcome to Taylorsville, Miss Zander, he said. I reckon we'll be seeing each other around town. As Willow followed Mrs. Holloway inside, she couldn't help but glance back at the retreating figure of Preston Cole. Her chest still tingled from their unusual encounter, and she wondered what other surprises Taylorsville might hold for her. The next morning, Willow awoke to the unfamiliar sounds of a frontier town coming to life. Roosters crowed, wagons rumbled past, and somewhere nearby, a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil. Her room at the boarding house was simple but comfortable: a narrow bed, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small writing desk beneath the window. After dressing in one of her plain but serviceable dresses, Willow made her way downstairs to find Mrs. Holloway serving breakfast to the other boarders: a middle-aged storekeeper named Mr. Jenkins and an elderly widow, Mrs. Farthing. Good morning, Miss Zander. Mrs. Holloway greeted her. I trust you slept well. Very well, thank you, Willow replied, though in truth, her dreams had been filled with piercing blue eyes and the sensation of shared breath. The school board president, Mr. Whitmore, stopped by earlier, Mrs. Holloway said as she placed a plate of eggs and bacon before Willow. He'd like you to come by the schoolhouse this afternoon to get settled before classes begin on Monday. I'll go right after breakfast, Willow said, eager to see her new workplace. I told him about your spell yesterday, Mrs. Holloway continued, causing Willow to freeze mid-bite. He said his wife went through the same thing when they moved here from Illinois. Nothing to worry about. Relief washed over Willow. Perhaps Marshal Cole had been right about Western attitudes after all. After breakfast, Willow set out to explore Taylorsville. The town was larger than she had initially thought, with a main street boasting a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a small hotel, and various other businesses. The church stood at one end of town, while the schoolhouse was situated at the opposite end, a bit removed from the bustle of commerce. As she approached the whitewashed building that would be her workplace, Willow noticed a familiar figure standing on the porch: Preston Cole, deep in conversation with an older gentleman who must be Mr. Whitmore. The marshal spotted her first, and something in his expression made Willow's heart quicken. Good morning, Marshal Cole, she greeted, proud of how steady her voice sounded despite the flutter in her chest. Miss Zander, he replied with a nod. Feeling better today, I hope? Much better, thank you. Mr. Whitmore stepped forward, a portly man with mutton chop whiskers and a pocket watch chain stretching across his vest. Miss Zander, welcome to Taylorsville School. I'm Herbert Whitmore, president of the school board. As Mr. Whitmore showed her around the one-room schoolhouse, Willow became aware that Preston remained close, offering occasional comments about the town and its children. The schoolhouse was simple but well-built, with rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. A small stove stood in the corner for winter heating, and bookshelves lined the back wall, though they were sparsely filled. The town has allocated funds for additional books, Mr. Whitmore explained, noticing her gaze. We've ordered them from Chicago, but deliveries can be unpredictable. I brought some of my own books, Willow assured him, and I'm quite resourceful with limited materials. Excellent. Mr. Whitmore beamed. Now, you'll have approximately 20 students of varying ages and abilities. Some of the ranch children may only attend sporadically during planting and harvest times. As Mr. Whitmore continued explaining the particulars of her position, Willow found her attention repeatedly drawn to Preston, who was examining the schoolhouse windows with a critical eye. Is something wrong with the windows, Marshal? She finally asked. Preston turned to her with a slight frown. The catches are loose. Should be fixed before winter comes. Wouldn't want you and the children getting cold. I'll add it to the town council's list, Mr. Whitmore said dismissively. Now, Miss Zander, about your living arrangements, I'll fix them myself, Preston interrupted. No need to wait for council approval for something this simple. Mr. Whitmore raised his eyebrows, but didn't object. Very well. Marshal Cole has always been quite handy, Miss Zander. A man of many talents. Something in Mr. Whitmore's tone suggested he knew about their unusual introduction, and Willow felt heat rise to her cheeks. After Mr. Whitmore departed, Preston lingered, examining the classroom with a thoughtful expression. "You don't need to repair the windows yourself, Marshal," Willow said, arranging books on her desk. "I'm sure you have more important duties." "Call me Preston," he said, ignoring her protest. "And it's no trouble. This building was one of the first I helped raise when I came to Taylorsville 6 years ago." Willow paused. "You helped build the school?" "This school, the church, half the buildings on Main Street," he confirmed. "I wasn't always the marshal. Started as a carpenter before the town council convinced me to pin on this badge." Willow found herself intrigued by this revelation. How does a carpenter become a lawman? Preston's expression darkened momentarily. "When the previous marshal is gunned down in the street, and you're the one who brings in the men responsible, folks tend to see you differently." The casual way he mentioned such violence reminded Willow just how far she was from Boston's civilized streets. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been difficult." Preston shrugged, but his eyes betrayed that the memory still troubled him. "It was 3 years ago. Town's been mostly peaceful since." An awkward silence fell between them until Preston cleared his throat. "I should let you get settled. I'll come by tomorrow to fix those windows." "Thank you," Willow said, oddly disappointed to see him go. "And thank you again for yesterday. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't been there." Preston paused at the door, his blue eyes meeting hers. "In my experience, Miss Zander, you seem like the kind of woman who would have found her breath eventually. But I'm glad I was there all the same." With that, he was gone, leaving Willow to wonder about the enigmatic Marshal Preston Cole and why his absence left the schoolroom feeling suddenly empty. The next few days passed in a blur as Willow prepared for her first day of teaching. She organized lessons, arranged the classroom, and continued exploring Taylorsville, gradually meeting more of the townspeople. Most were welcoming, though some viewed her with the suspicion typically reserved for Easterners who might consider themselves above frontier life. True to his word, Preston arrived at the schoolhouse on Saturday morning with his toolbox. Willow had been there since dawn, writing out lessons on the blackboard, and was startled by his arrival. "You're here early," he commented, setting down his tools. "As are you," she countered with a smile. "Does the town marshal typically work on weekends?" "Trouble doesn't take weekends off," he said, returning her smile. "But I'm not here officially. Just a man keeping his promise about some windows." As Preston worked, Willow continued her preparations, though she found it increasingly difficult to concentrate with him nearby. Every so often, their eyes would meet, and Willow would remember the feel of his breath filling her lungs. "May I ask you something personal?" she ventured during a lull. Preston looked up from his work. "You can ask. Can't promise I'll answer. What you did when I couldn't breathe, is that something you learned as a marshal?" Preston's hands stilled. "No. I learned it from an army surgeon during the war. Saw him do it for a soldier who'd nearly drowned crossing a river. The surgeon called it sharing life." "You fought in the war?" Willow asked, realizing how little she knew about this man. "Union cavalry," Preston confirmed. "Enlisted in '63 when I was 18. Saw action in Tennessee and Georgia." Willow nodded thoughtfully. "My father and older brother both served. My brother didn't return." Preston's expression softened. "I'm sorry to hear that. Too many good men didn't come home. Is that why you came west?" "After the war." "Partly," Preston admitted. "Couldn't stand the pitying looks back home in Pennsylvania. Everyone watching the survivors, waiting for us to break down or go crazy." He tested the window latch he'd just repaired. "Out here, a man is judged by what he does now, not what he's seen or done before." Willow understood the appeal. Wasn't that partly why she had come to Wyoming herself? To escape the whispers and sympathetic glances that followed her family's tragedies? "I think I understand," she said quietly. Preston studied her for a moment. "I believe you might at that, Miss Zander." "Willow," she corrected him. "If I'm to call you Preston, you should call me Willow." "Willow," he repeated, and something about the way her name sounded in his deep voice sent a pleasant shiver down her spine. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a breathless young boy at the schoolhouse door. Marshal Cole," the boy called. "Pa sent me to fetch you. There's a fight breaking out at Donovan's saloon." Preston sighed and gathered his tools. "Duty calls. I'll finish the windows another time." "Be careful," Willow called after him as he hurried away. The concern in her voice surprised her. In just a few days, Marshal Preston Cole had become someone she worried about, someone whose safety mattered to her. It was an unsettling realization. Monday morning arrived, bringing with it Willow's first day as Taylorsville's teacher. Her students ranged from 6-year-old beginners to teenagers almost ready to leave school behind for adult responsibilities. As Mr. Whitmore had warned, their educational backgrounds varied wildly. Some could barely recognize letters, while others had been well tutored by previous teachers or educated parents. Among her students was 12-year-old Emma Cole, whose striking blue eyes immediately identified her as Preston's younger sister. The girl was bright and eager to learn, frequently raising her hand to answer questions. When the school day ended, Willow was exhausted but satisfied. Most of the children seemed receptive to her teaching style, and only one boy, the blacksmith's son, had tested her authority, quickly backing down when she assigned extra slate work. As she was gathering her things to return to the boarding house, Emma Cole lingered behind. "Miss Zander? My brother asked me to give you this." The girl handed over a small wooden object. Upon closer inspection, Willow realized it was a beautifully carved whistle. "Preston said it's louder than your voice if you need to call for help," Emma explained. "And he said to tell you he'll be by tomorrow to finish the windows." Willow turned the whistle over in her hands, touched by the thoughtful gift. "Thank you, Emma. Your brother is very kind." Emma beamed. "He's the best. He's been taking care of me since our parents died in the influenza outbreak 5 years ago. He even built us a nice house at the edge of town." "I'm sorry about your parents," Willow said gently, adding another layer to her understanding of Preston Cole. Not just a marshal and former soldier, but also a brother who had stepped into a parental role for his young sister. "It's all right," Emma said with the resilience of youth. "Preston says as long as we remember them, they're never really gone." As promised, Preston appeared at the schoolhouse the following afternoon after classes had ended. He worked on the remaining windows while Willow graded spelling assignments, their comfortable silence occasionally broken by conversation. "Emma seems to be a very bright student," Willow observed. Preston smiled with obvious pride. "She's always had a quick mind. Takes after our mother that way. She told me about your parents." "I'm very sorry." Preston nodded, his expression somber. It was hard on Emma. She was only 7 when it happened. "I'd just become marshal, trying to learn the job while figuring out how to raise a little girl." "You've done well," Willow assured him. "She's a credit to you." "I just do my best," Preston said, though she could tell her words had pleased him. "What about you? What brought you all the way from Boston to our dusty little town?" Willow hesitated. She rarely spoke of her family's tragedies, but something about Preston made her want to share her story. "My family is gone," she said simply. "Father died in a railway accident 2 years ago. Mother from consumption last winter. My older sister and brother were lost years before her to typhoid, him to the war." Preston stopped working, giving her his full attention. "I'm sorry, Willow. That's more loss than anyone should have to bear. After Mother died, there was nothing left for me in Boston except memories and debts," she continued. "When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Wyoming Territory, it seemed like Providence." "And was it?" Preston asked. "Providence, I mean." Willow met his gaze. "I'm beginning to think it might have been." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a recognition of kindred spirits who had endured loss, yet continued forward. The moment was broken by a knock at the schoolhouse door. Mr. Whitmore stood there, his expression troubled. "Marshal Cole, glad I found you here. There's a situation that requires your attention." Preston's demeanor immediately shifted to that of the lawman. "What kind of situation?" "Cattle rustlers hit the Peterson place last night. Jack Peterson rode in just now with a bullet in his shoulder. Doc Jenkins is tending to him, but he says the rustlers are holed up in Blackwater Canyon." Preston nodded grimly. "I'll gather a posse." "Be careful," Mr. Whitmore warned. "Peterson says there are at least 5 of them, well armed." As the men discussed the details, Willow felt a cold fear grip her heart. She had just found Preston Cole. She couldn't bear the thought of losing him to outlaw bullets. When Mr. Whitmore departed, Preston turned to Willow. "I need to go. Duty calls." "When will you return?" she asked, unable to hide her concern. "Hard to say. Blackwater Canyon is a day's ride. Could be gone 2, 3 days if we have to track them." Willow nodded, trying to appear composed. "Of course. You must do your duty. Preston hesitated, then took a step closer to her. Willow, whatever he intended to say remained unspoken as another knock interrupted them. This time it was one of the town's deputies, already equipped for the journey. We're ready when you are, Marshal. Preston nodded to the deputy, then turned back to Willow. Take care while I'm gone. And use that whistle if there's trouble. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her with an unfinished window and an unspoken fear that he might not return. The next 3 days were the longest of Willow's life. She taught her classes, attended church on Sunday, and tried to maintain a calm exterior, but her thoughts constantly returned to Preston and the dangers he might be facing. Emma stayed with Mrs. Holloway during her brother's absence, and Willow found some comfort in the girl's company. They would sit on the porch after supper, Emma sharing stories about her brother that painted a picture of a man who was kind, fair, and unfailingly protective of those he cared about. On the third evening, as twilight descended on Taylorsville, the sound of approaching horses drew everyone to the main street. The posse was returning, dusty and weary, but victorious. The rustlers had been captured, their stolen cattle recovered. Willow's eyes sought Preston among the returning men, her heart leaping when she spotted him at the head of the group. But her relief turned to concern when she noticed how he slumped slightly in his saddle, his right arm held stiffly against his body. As the crowd surrounded the posse, congratulating them on their success, Willow pushed her way through until she reached Preston's horse. "You're hurt," she said, noting the blood-stained bandage visible beneath his torn shirt. Preston dismounted carefully, wincing as his boots hit the ground. "Just a graze. One of the rustlers got lucky. Have you seen Doc Jenkins?" "No time yet. Had to get the prisoners secured first." He nodded toward the jail, where deputies were leading the captured rustlers. "Come to the boarding house," Willow insisted. "Mrs. Holloway has medical supplies, and Emma is waiting for you there." Too tired to argue, Preston followed her. At the boarding house, Emma flung herself into her brother's arms, careful of his injured side. Mrs. Holloway immediately set about preparing hot water and clean bandages, while Willow helped Preston remove his duster and torn shirt. The graze was more serious than Preston had admitted, a deep furrow across his upper arm that had been hastily bandaged in the field. Willow cleaned the wound gently, applying the antiseptic Mrs. Holloway provided. "You could have been killed," Willow said softly as she worked, conscious of Emma's anxious presence nearby. "Part of the job," Preston replied, though his eyes told her he understood her fear. When the wound was properly dressed, Mrs. Holloway insisted Preston stay for supper, declaring him too exhausted to prepare a meal for himself and Emma. The meal was a lively affair, with Preston recounting a carefully edited version of the posse's adventure for his sister's benefit. Later, as Preston and Emma prepared to leave, Willow walked them to the door. "Thank you for tending to my wound," Preston said. "You have a gentle touch." "I had practice during the war," Willow explained. "I volunteered at a military hospital in Boston." Something shifted in Preston's expression: understanding, respect, and something deeper. "I'm glad you're here, Willow Zander." The simple statement warmed her more than any flowery declaration could have. "So am I, Preston Cole." As spring turned to summer, Willow settled into life in Taylorsville. Her students progressed in their studies, and she found herself increasingly involved in community activities. She helped organize the town's Independence Day celebration, assisted with Sunday school at the church, and even joined the ladies' quilting circle, though her stitches never quite matched the neat precision of the Western women's handiwork. Throughout these months, her friendship with Preston deepened. He became a regular visitor to the schoolhouse, completing the window repairs and undertaking other small improvements to the building. They would often share lunch or an early supper, talking about books, their experiences during the war, and their hopes for the future. Emma thrived under Willow's teaching, and the girl seemed delighted by the growing closeness between her brother and her teacher. More than once, Willow suspected Emma of inventing excuses to leave them alone together. By mid-August, as the first hints of autumn touched the Wyoming landscape, Willow realized she had fallen in love with Preston Cole. The revelation didn't come as a great shock, rather. It felt like acknowledging a truth that had been evident for some time. What she didn't know was whether Preston returned her feelings or simply valued her friendship. Her answer came on a warm Saturday afternoon when Preston invited her to ride with him to a spot outside town. They rode at a leisurely pace, Preston pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the early days of Taylorsville settlement. After about an hour, they reached a small, tree-shaded creek where Preston suggested they stop to rest the horses and enjoy the lunch he had packed. As they sat on a blanket spread beneath a cottonwood tree, the conversation flowed easily between them until a comfortable lull fell. "I brought you here for a reason," Preston finally said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. Willow's heart quickened. "Oh, this is where I want to build my ranch someday," he explained, gesturing to the rolling landscape around them. "The town council has been after me to train a new marshal. I've been considering it." "You want to leave your position?" Willow asked, surprised. Preston had always seemed so dedicated to his role as marshal. "I've been wearing this badge for 6 years," Preston said. "I'm proud of what I've done, but I never meant it to be my life's work. I want to build something lasting, something I can pass on to future generations." The implication hung in the air between them. "That sounds like a wonderful dream," Willow said carefully, not wanting to presume too much. Preston took a deep breath. It wouldn't be much of a dream without someone to share it with. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wooden box, intricately carved with wildflowers. "I made this for you." With trembling fingers, Willow opened the box to find a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. "Willow Zander," Preston said, his blue eyes steady on hers. "From the moment you stepped off that stagecoach and into my life, I've been captivated by your strength, your intelligence, and your kind heart. When you couldn't breathe that day, I gave you my air. Now I'm asking if you'll share your life with mine. Will you marry me?" Tears filled Willow's eyes as joy surged through her. "Yes, Preston. Yes, I will marry you." As Preston slipped the ring onto her finger, Willow felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. When he leaned forward to seal their engagement with a kiss, she met him halfway, this time sharing breath not out of necessity, but out of love. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Taylorsville, met with general approval and a few knowing smiles from those who had observed their growing closeness. Emma was ecstatic, immediately claiming Willow as her sister and peppering her with questions about the wedding. They were married in early October, as the aspens turned golden in the mountains. The ceremony took place in Taylorsville's church, with Emma serving as Willow's maid of honor and the deputy marshal standing up for Preston. The entire town turned out for the celebration that followed, a testament to the respect both bride and groom had earned in the community. Preston had arranged for a substitute teacher so that Willow could enjoy a brief honeymoon. They traveled to Denver, staying in the finest hotel and attending the theater luxuries that reminded Willow of her Boston life, though she found she preferred the simplicity of Taylorsville. Upon their return, they moved into Preston's house at the edge of town, a comfortable dwelling he had built with his own hands. Emma welcomed Willow into their home with enthusiasm, helping her arrange her belongings and explaining the household routines. Married life suited them well. Preston continued his duties as marshal while working with his chosen successor, and Willow taught at the schoolhouse, returning each day to a home filled with love and laughter. Their evenings were spent planning their future ranch, discussing which crops they might grow and what livestock they would raise. By the following spring, Preston had officially stepped down as marshal, though he occasionally assisted with particularly difficult cases. He purchased land near the creek where he had proposed, and construction of their ranch house began. The town gathered for an old-fashioned barn raising, completing the main structures in a matter of weeks. It was during the move to their new ranch that Willow discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled Preston with joy, and he redoubled his efforts to complete their home before winter arrived. Emma, now 15, was equally excited about becoming an aunt and helped Willow prepare a nursery. Their son, James William Cole, was born on a snowy December night in 1879. He arrived with a lusty cry and a head of dark hair, his tiny fingers grasping Preston's thumb with surprising strength. "He's perfect," Preston whispered, cradling his son while sitting beside Willow's bed. "Thank you for this gift." Willow smiled tiredly, her heart so full it seemed impossible. "I never imagined I could be this happy when I stepped off that stagecoach last year." Preston leaned down to kiss her forehead. "Remember what I told you then? Sometimes we all need to borrow a little air until we can breathe on our own. I remember, Willow said, reaching up to touch his face. But I think I'll keep borrowing yours forever, just because I can. In the years that followed, the Cole ranch prospered. They added cattle and horses to their holdings, and their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the territory. Emma eventually married the son of a neighboring rancher, building her own home nearby. James was joined by a sister, Catherine, 2 years later, and eventually by another brother, Thomas. The Cole children grew up strong and free in the Wyoming landscape, educated first by their mother and later at the expanded Taylorsville School. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, Preston surprised Willow with a journey back east to visit Boston. The city seemed smaller than she remembered, the familiar streets holding ghosts of her past life. They visited her family's graves, Preston standing strong beside her as she said her final goodbyes. On their last night in Boston, as they walked along the harbor where Willow had once watched ships departing for distant lands, Preston asked, "Do you ever regret leaving? Coming to Wyoming?" Willow shook her head, squeezing his hand. "Never. Boston was where I was born, but Taylorsville is where I found life again. Where I found you." As they returned to their Wyoming home, Willow reflected on the journey that had brought her west. She had arrived in Taylorsville barely able to breathe, uncertain of her future. Now, surrounded by family and purpose, her lungs filled easily with the clear mountain air. Preston had given her his breath when she needed it most, but he had also given her so much more: a home, a family, and a love that sustained her through all of life's challenges. Standing on the porch of their ranch house, watching Preston teach young James how to gentle a colt while Catherine and Thomas played nearby, Willow knew that some journeys, no matter how difficult their beginning, led exactly where they were meant to. And sometimes, when you couldn't breathe, all you needed was someone willing to share their air until you could find your own.